Breaking the gray.
Sarah, Chuck, we good? Are we here? We're all living and live on our podcast today.
We're all good, Russ. Everything's good. No techie issues. We're totally fine today.
Good. It's great to see you. Look radiant as usual. Looks like you've had some good morning and daylight today.
Yes, out in the British summer, which the heat wave continues, which is fabulous.
Yeah, we're about to get one, apparently. And I live in one part of the Bay Area where I looked, and around the Bay Area, it's like 195, and it's like where I live, it's 65. I'm like, okay, well, I guess I live in a cloud, which is wonderful. So, Sarah, who do we have today? Another brilliant guest. I'd love for you to introduce our wonderful guest.
Yeah, so I want to introduce Dr. Robert Yoho, and I've only recently been introduced to his work, and it's something that I was connected with him, and now I've started to receive his newsletter, which is a total eye-opener, and actually something that does resonate with me on a lot of levels. So thank you so much for agreeing to be a guest, Robert, and you're in California too, so maybe you're getting some of this lovely sunshine yourself.
It's a heat wave down here in LA. I mean, it's probably nearly 100 degrees where I am in the Central Valley. It's over 100.
Wow.
But thank you.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to be with you guys.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure to have you on.
So I always do a 10-second disclaimer at the beginning. I'm retired. You don't have to doctor me anymore. I understand your qualifications and Russ's qualifications. We're all colleagues here. You guys are a little younger, but you've got your own perspectives. And the other thing is, this is not medical advice. Use this information at your own risk, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Sorry about that. We got to do that because the lawyers in America.
Yeah, Sarah and I have been doing this Rebel Scientist podcast for nearly 2 years. Our 2-year anniversary is coming up, and we've learned a lot. And I think a lot of things that, especially for me, I'm new to all of this. Is the getting outside, getting enough sleep, eating correctly, really tracking and knowing what your body is telling you with your Oura rings. I'm obsessed with understanding your area of practice. I suffered from early age cancer. I had lymphoma. A lot of radiation treatment really impacted my hormones. I've been on thyroid replacement medication for nearly 2 decades. And as I'm getting older, I just feel like crap. I mean, I try a bunch of different things, and I just haven't been able to get on that right groove of feeling like I have the energy, or feeling like I'm digesting my food correctly, or that I'm sleeping soundly. So I really am excited to talk to you today.
Okay, that's a nice introduction. Thank you. So I spent the last 30 years in private practice. I retired several years ago, and I actually was a cosmetic surgeon, and I worked primarily with women, and most of them, as I matured, as I aged, were over 50 years old, and they suffered from a lot of symptoms like that were due to their menopause. Now, men kind of get the dwindles as we mature and our hormone levels drop, but women fall off a cliff between 48 and 52, generally. Sometimes I've identified menopause or change of life as early as the mid-30s, and with hormone levels that were all zero, and the women felt terrible, and they felt great when the hormones were replaced. So most of the plastic surgeons operate on a string of depressed patients without considering why they're so miserable. But since my patients were trusting me, I felt like I'd go a step further, and I took training in hormone replacement. I got in with this group in California and the country and the world called World Link Medical. I eventually got certified. And so what I did for them is, nobody wants to pay extra for something they didn't come in for. They were all there for their breast enlargement or their liposuction or their facelifts or something. And so I just offered the menopausal ones, the ones that obviously had symptoms. If they were interested, I offered them a free hormone pellet inserted underneath their skin that gave them 3 months of relief. And this is, the one I used was testosterone, and I used it because it breaks down to estrogen as well. And I just threw it in for free. I mean, it cost me $20 and it was a little procedure, but since I was doing surgery, it took me 3 seconds to put it in. It's no big deal. I just had them put it on the tray. And 95% of these women just really improved. They felt great. They frequently thought it was due to the surgery, but I usually tried to disabuse them of that. I'm not a magician surgically, but the hormones are truly magic. So it's a total feel-good story. But the thyroid is impressively helpful. Estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone are miracles almost over 50. And sometimes in younger people. And we've had these things around for a tremendous length of time. We've had thyroids for 120 years. We have clinical experience with that for that time. And insulin, estrogen, and testosterone for 60, 70, 80 years. I mean, it's amazing. And they're tried and true preventions for heart disease, depression, impotence, diabetes, some cancers, and Alzheimer's disease. Now, I know that sounds crazy, because we've got all this misinformation being passed around. And the FDA, and which we've lately learned is a completely corrupted and industry-dominated organization, it put black box warnings on progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone, right? A black box warning is the most severe kind of warning claiming that this medication should only be used with great caution and so on and so forth. But as I got into the literature, I realized that these were debunked and that the FDA, there was something going on with the FDA. And I later studied it and learned more, and recent events have showed us what a fraud the FDA is. But anyway, I got further and further into this hormone therapy thing, and I offered it to my patients, and it was extremely satisfying for my patients and for me. And I eventually wrote this book, Hormone Secrets, and my website for these books is robertyohoauthor.com, robertyohoauthor.com. So that's my introduction. We can jump into the individual hormones and how much they help.
Yeah, I'm interested to know, what was it that you said that you used in the surgery that you were initially investigating? Did you say testosterone?
I use a testosterone pellet, and that is an accepted single therapy for hormone problems. And you can use testosterone and get probably 65 or 70% of the benefits of all the other hormones, presuming you don't have a big thyroid issue like Russ. I mean, thyroid is its own story. It's much more complicated. Russ, I'm going to send you guys these books are $4 on Kindle. They're not cheap. Yeah. They're not expensive. And so if you guys are interested, I will send you a way to download them for free. And Russ, you study the thyroid section and read stopthethyroidinsanity.com website, because that thing tells you all the crazy politics, all the big pharma nonsense that's gone on, and how the standard of care has been tremendously distorted. So I use bioidentical hormones, which means they're the same. I used bioidentical hormones, which means they're the same as the human body components and not some synthetic thing that Big Pharma dreamed up in a lab and patented. And some of these things have been shown to cause problems. Now, they're not worse than nothing, right? But they have, for example, the progesterone analogs, the progestins, such as Provera, they're troublemakers, and they cause an occasional breast cancer and some other things, and probably shouldn't be used for birth control pills like they're promiscuously used for birth control pills. And so lead me down the roads that you're most interested in, and I will I'll help you out. Go ahead, Russ.
Yeah. Well, I'm just curious about prolonged. I've been on Levoxyl and Synthroid for 2 decades, and the prolonged use of that, and as my body's getting older and I can feel it takes longer to recover, my sleep is not as sound as it used to be. Things are just is there any long-term risk of being on thyroid replacement?
None. And the one you're on is imperfect, but you should continue it on it lifelong. I mean, is the other one, the second thyroid, is that a T3? What you mentioned, the thyroxine, that's T4. What is the other compound?
I'm just on one. I'm only on Levoxyl, but they switched me up. I was on Synthroid for many years, and then now I'm on Levoxyl.
Well, Synthroid is the original, and that's the proprietary medication. And for once, I have to recommend the proprietary medication. And so you may not be feeling as good because you got off of that and you got on something that's a generic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
So, but anyway, there's another trick for you if you read that stuff. There are two kinds of thyroid, the T3 and the T4, and you are on solely T3. So that's actually doesn't work well for many people. There are sources of T3. You can either get synthetic T3 or you can get natural T3, which is, we consider the pig T3 natural. So if you can find someone who will prescribe you, and it shouldn't be hard, you can go to worldlinkmedical.com and find a physician who was trained like I was, and find someone who can try you on porcine, such as Armour Thyroid. Now, this is described more thoroughly in stopthethyroidinsanity.com. So I recommend that you study that stuff. It's the most complex part of hormone therapy. And the T3 is thought to be converted from T4 in most cases, and indeed it is. But it doesn't work perfectly, and it can stop working. And that may be your whole problem right there. Although if you're not on thyroid and if you're not on testosterone in your age group, you're likely to benefit greatly from that. Everybody has low testosterone, almost. I mean, I've encountered people who are 62, men who are 62 that have very high testosterone levels, but it's not that common.
That's great. And one of the things about our podcast is we talk a lot about women's health, and Sarah has many biohackers on that are leading the industry for female well-being and female health. And I know, Sarah, I'd love for you to kind of take over and kind of talk through a bit of that as well, because I think it's a lot of our audience would be more curious about that than my old man thyroid.
Russ, you're good. You're good. And let me just launch into Sarah's thing with a claim that your listeners and you are going to think is absolutely insane. And that is, if we put every woman on the proper estrogen after the menopause, we would reduce Alzheimer's by 80%. Now, I know that's not something you're going to believe right out of the box, but in my book, I've got an appendix with 75 references, right? So that is how distorted this field is we're not using this thing, which is bioidentical, can't be patented, inexpensive, but in favor, we are using things like antidepressants and statins and synthetic hormones, which are not as good. I mean, they're not terrible, but, with the exception of antidepressants, those are terrible. But we're not here to talk about those. So, Sarah, sorry, go ahead and launch and challenge me any way you can. I mean, I'm used to getting any kind of questions.
What I was wondering is, we're saying bioidentical hormones. I wonder if you can just explain to me what that actually means, because presumably if you're giving people testosterone or estrogen, it's synthesized somewhere. You're not giving like an animal hormone.
Yeah.
Or you are?
Well, in some cases you are. What the definition of that is that they are identical to human body components. Now, the two hormones that were traditionally given instead of estrogen and progesterone that are bioidentical are horse urine estrogen, or Premarin, and a progesterone that's synthesized and not the same as progesterone called Provera and Ogen, I think. I don't want to be sure. I'm not sure about the Ogen, but Provera is one of the compounds, and that's called a progestin. And these names were designed to specifically confuse everyone and make everyone think that they were the same as bioidentical hormones, right? Now, the reason why pharma doesn't want to use bioidentical hormones is that they cannot be patented. They're bioidentical. They're parts of the human body. Parts of the human body can't be patented. Everybody has one. So that's the story in a nutshell. And they make untold tens of billions or hundreds of billions of dollars off these other drugs. And they're still being marketed heavily. I mean, the horse urine we have this study that was published around 2003 called the Women's Health Initiative. And that was the most expensive study ever devised. It cost $1 billion almost. And it was distorted as many of our medical studies to claim that these drugs were terrible. And you guys probably aren't aware, but the British Medical Journal is one of the big 5 medical journals, and it had a editorial a year ago that the title of the editorial was "Time to Assume That Pharmaceutical Studies Are Fraudulent Until Proven Otherwise." I almost exactly quoted that. You can search for that online and you can read it. But this study was ruined and distorted to claim that all hormones were bad. And it studied hormones that were obsolete at the time that the study was completed. It studied Premarin, which is horse urine estrogen, which is problematic. It's not terrible. It's much better than nothing. And it studied Provera, which is the progestin, which is a related compound to progesterone, which is terrible. And, should never be. Well, these things have uses, but only for short term. They should never be administered long term. They're good to stop bleeding, given intravenously. If you've got uterine bleeding, they work really well. And there are some other uses, but they're not medications to be given as aging prophylaxis or improvement of symptoms long term.
What I was wondering is, you said that it was estrogen, I believe, that you could give all women over, say, 48, and then you would reduce Alzheimer's, the bioidentical form.
Yeah. Now, there's, this stuff is not that complex, and I try to explain the whole thing in Hormone Secrets, right? But it requires a little bit of study. Estrogen decreases Alzheimer's by 85%, according to 75 studies that I have in Appendix C. And I mean, that's a claim that no one's going to believe unless they have a look at what I've left in that appendix. I mean, it's crazy. And it just goes to the point of how distorted our medical literature is by these pharmaceutical manufacturing and profit driven interests. I mean, it's crazy.
Of course. And how would you get hold of this like the bioidentical hormone? I mean, in the States, you can kind of ask for the drugs you want, but over here in the UK, we have a nationalized service, and you don't have the choice of doctor or what you get prescribed. Is it something that you can? No, you can hack?
Well, you can hack anything if you read Hormone Secrets and you send off to India for what you want.
Right.
You can hack what you want. I'm not. No physician would ever recommend that, but things are so insane with the way that we're interacting with the medical establishment and our individual doctors that some people are driven to that. So ideally, you find a physician who prescribes this stuff. Now, the exact chemical names and the whole thing are in Hormone Secrets. I mean, you can read about it, but in brief, estradiol is the estrogen that you want, and the typical doses are a couple milligrams a day, and you need to take progesterone anyway, because progesterone has excellent and profound and advantageous effects that are separate from estrogen. Progesterone has separate effects, so you need to take that too to get the best possible response. Now, there's another problem, and this is down into the weeds a little bit, but if you have a uterus and you take estrogen continuously without progesterone, it slightly increases the chances of uterine cancer. But if you take progesterone in combination, the chances drop to way lower than if you took neither. Okay, that's a little complex, but you should be taking both. Now, there's a narrative primarily advanced by some gynecologists, and that if you don't have a uterus, you don't need progesterone, right? And they have figured out with their very shrewd reasoning that if you cut out an organ that can have cancer, you may not have to take another medicine that, okay. So, but the problem is, of course, that's not the whole story. The whole story is that progesterone has many beneficial effects, and there are plenty of reasons to take it because, outside of the cancer prevention aspects of the uterine cancer.
And what do you think is going on in the brain? Because what's going on to kind of have that hugely increased risk of Alzheimer's if your hormone levels are not high enough?
Okay, so I'm a clinician, right? And this is a kind of a research question or a real smart guy question. And Sarah, I am, clinicians are empiricists. In other words, we believe in, ideally we have double-blind controlled studies, but a step down from that are multiple anecdotes, right?
Yep.
So if you have the experience I have, you're completely convinced that this stuff's miraculous. And we have a lot of studies, and they're very good, but they're not the level of the studies that are required for the proprietary drugs, because those studies cost millions or tens of millions of dollars, and they're done for a specific purpose, and they're usually adulterated. In other words, they're ruined because the people guarding the hen house are the foxes. I mean, the pharmaceutical company actually do the damn studies. And I'm sorry if I swore there. If this is a GP, GP,
we're the rebel scientists. We're kind of cool with that.
We're PG-17. We're
okay.
Yes.
Yeah, we can say those words. We're okay.
Okay, nice.
It is interesting though, because I feel there's so many. This is an area where and you mentioned this in the beginning, if you don't approach this with a professional to help you, or you don't approach this with reading the proper documents, it could go terribly wrong if you're messing with your hormones, right? And I was just listening to another podcast about goiters and iodine, and similarly, this was a long time ago, but to treat goiters was hyperthyroidism, and so and they overtreated it, and now everybody was suffering. So, but like I wonder here, there's always a tendency for biohackers to overdo it, and to like go the extreme. Here, you have to really know your dosage. And I've been on prednisone before, and it took me a long time to get off of that and taper down. I'm wondering, what are some of the things you suggest here, Dr. Yoho, to really help people understand that part? Because this is, these are people that are, being their own doctors in some sense, right?
That's a fascinating question, and there's a lot of different aspects to it. So, today in modern healthcare, you practically need to have physician-level expertise to navigate it, and otherwise, you're going to get swept into some eddy or bywater where your money gets harvested and you may be harmed. Now, that's a bold statement, but it's absolutely true. You guys probably are aware that 50% of what American healthcare is either wrong-headed or actually injurious, and that's not a controversial statement academically. There's plenty of literature, and you can read in my original book, Butchered by Healthcare, about that. There it is. Can you see it?
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Okay, so see how inflammatory that title is. This thing took 3 years to write. So, yeah, you've got to be careful, but frankly, you've got to figure all this stuff out on your own. And Russ, if I were you, I would study the whole thing, but particularly focus on thyroid at first. It's going to take you a week to figure the thyroid out, and then you'll know as much as the endocrinologist. But if you have certain kinds of diseases, you do need the endocrinologist. And I recommend first, for most people, just consulting with a hormone doctor, right? The hormone doctor are people that supply prophylactic hormones for age-related things, and sometimes treat other conditions like, young women have, some of them have a horrible PMS, and that can be treated with progesterone. It's a lack of progesterone. It's harmless, and the second half of the cycle, they can chow down on progesterone, and they're absolutely normal. They don't have all the symptoms. But the answer is that you have to know it all, And once you figure it out, you're gonna be telling the guys what to do for the most part, unless their endocrinologists have some specialized areas, but they are quite suspicious of of low dose thyroid supplementation for people who just have the dwindles. And they claim that it causes osteoporosis, and they claim that it causes atrial fibrillation, which are two significant problems. But they are used to treating a very difficult disease called Graves' disease, where the thyroid kind of goes crazy, and it needs specialized drugs to suppress, and then it needs careful supplementation. It's a balancing act. But most of the people who need thyroid do not have Graves' disease. They have their thyroid just has the dwindles, and they need a little supplementation. And it's probably 40% of women in America are thought to benefit from a little bit of thyroid supplementation. And if you're not aggressive about that, you get no result. The osteoporosis and the atrial fibrillation has only been documented with Graves' disease, right? Which is fairly common. It's 3% of the population. And you need an endocrinologist to treat that. But for the most part, a little thyroid supplementation, carefully given, is the way to go. And if you take too much, you're not going to feel good, and you just stop it. See, with Graves' disease, the thyroid's going nuts, and you can't just stop it. You need to use these other drugs to shut it down over a long period of time.
Yeah,
right.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Well, over here in the UK at the moment, we've got a massive campaign about menopause. You know, it's a big thing, and people I feel like are almost being pushed into having symptoms because, you know, they're being told that they have symptoms. And certainly when I go to the doctor, I'm 48, whenever I go to the doctor, they say, right, you're going through your menopause, which, you know, we're going to put you on one of these drugs. Let's start you here. And I, so far, have resisted just because I don't have, I think, symptoms of a menopause. But what would you suggest then for women who are kind of coming up to menopause age? How can you kind of navigate that gracefully and make sure that you're not kind of taking something you don't need, but also make sure you're not missing out on something that maybe would be helpful?
Sarah, you're talking to someone who's really, I'm a rabid dog about this stuff, and I believe that almost everyone should be supplemented. And I think that it benefits their life. I think it benefits their attitude. I think it makes them live longer. You know, those are big claims. But if those guys are not, if your physicians over there are not promoting the proprietary drugs, if they're promoting bioidentical drugs, they're doing a good thing. But this sounds like a big pharma initiative. See, Britain, like America, is dominated by these people. I mean, they've threatened once to pull their marketing they pull out their manufacturing out of Britain if some of those antidepressants were not approved. You know, I mean, they're very much, they're dominant animals over there. And so my suspicion is what they're pushing is Premarin, the pregnant mare's urine, and Provera, which is the bad progesterone responsible for most of the problems in the Women's Health Initiative study. But if you go in to see them and you say, look, that's great, I just want estradiol and real progesterone from a compounder, and you probably have to pay for those. And, you know, over here we have compounding pharmacies, which are sort of a separate track from the regular pharmacies. The regular pharmacies just manufacture medicines in bulk. The compounding pharmacies make them up individually for each patient, or at least that's the theory. I mean, I don't know why they can't just make enough progesterone in different sizes to but in theory they make them up for individual patients. So, I mean, I'm a great believer in this stuff. You should read the anecdotes. I mean, here's an anecdote. Patsy's a 45-year-old accountant. I had my hysterectomy with ovary removal 10 years ago when my daughter was only 6 years old. I didn't get on hormone replacement until last year. I thought about my life and wrote my daughter an apology letter about the way I treated her. I was just so depressed and anxious. Progesterone has been the biggest relief. I feel human again. So and I've got QR codes in my book that you can access with your camera, and you can watch videos of my patients who told similar stories. Here's another one. Janice is 51. My marriage was disintegrating. I hated everyone around me, and I felt terrible. But I got on hormones, and they saved me. I'm trying to repair all the damage I did. I mean, those are real people, and I've got them. I've got videotapes about, and the men are similar.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people I know are kind of in that very anxious, depressed state. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of other stuff going on, a lot of environmental stressors, but I think certainly women my age that I speak to a lot of them are in that kind of anxious, depressed state and maybe not knowing what the cause is, because I think certainly, I mean, I need to check exactly what we're being offered by the GP, but I've never heard of the term bioidentical hormone before I started looking into the work that you're doing, so I would suggest probably not.
Russ, these women think that the problems are existential. They're not. They're just freaking hormones, and they get totally tuned when they take them. Here's now, just to be ecumenical about this, here's a man. Stephen was a retired.
Well, let me tell you, Dr. Yoho, us men, we like to blame other people. So it's either it's conflated or we're blaming somebody else. But the reality is, and that's I think what Sarah and I are trying to bring here, is that you can take some personal responsibility.
Yes.
Here. There's some things we can do
Yeah,
here.
this is about, for sure. This is about learning what you potentially need and then seeing how you can get it in the most effective way, for sure.
So Stephen is an 82-year-old retired CEO of a major media company, and this is what he said. I had lost all strength, and I was sitting in a wheelchair in a Palm Springs nursing home. The staff had to lift me in and out of bed. I was inches from being snuffed out. Then my doctor started coming in every week and giving me testosterone shots. In 6 weeks, I stood up and walked out of there back into my life. And that can work for women too. So this stuff's critical. I mean, it improves a great number of measures of health. Bone density, recovery from exercise is better. The cardiac problems are lessened with skin problems, improve with these hormones, heart disease, hot flashes, dental issues, irritability.
When do you think people should start thinking about this? Kind of what age in life should people start thinking about maybe replacing hormones?
So for women, frequently at 45, the progesterone goes away and they are left only with estrogen. And sometimes their periods are irregular, but they still have a period. Usually at 50, they fall off a cliff and all their hormone levels drop to zero. And so I would start thinking at 45 or even 40 for most women. And also, I mean, this should be common standard of care for GPs. I mean, they should think about this stuff for women in their 30s. And even some men who seem to have gotten the dwindles. I mean, the men can be, this stuff, the injectable testosterone, cream testosterone for men destroy fertility within a few years. So it's not as easy for younger men to just jump on testosterone, but there are two other medications that can stimulate testosterone production and not destroy fertility.
So for men, maybe a little bit later. For women, they need to start thinking about this at like 40 or before, and for men, maybe a little bit later.
Primary care should have this at the back of their head with every patient interaction, virtually. I mean, not the kids. I mean, women, they've got PCOS. They've got, the younger women, they get, testosterone is the best obesity drug we've ever had. The studies on men show weight loss over a decade, gradual weight loss. So there are a lot of cause and effects here that should be in the back of every primary's head. And if you guys read Hormone Secrets, you'll know as much as more than most of the doctors because it's got the avant-garde material. I don't make a dime on any of this stuff. I worked full time for 6 years on all my platforms, and I make less than $500 a month. Sometimes less than $200 a month. It's ridiculous.
And I think Sarah and we're doing this out of the goodness of our heart as well. And I think there's something around this, Dr. Yoho. I think curiosity-wise, are there things we shouldn't be doing that are common mistakes made by men and women when it comes to, medicines or supplements that we're taking? So, like things like taking things for keeping the hair in your head, or collagen or peptides, anything there that we need to maybe watch out for? Okay,
that's the $1 million question, Russ. You put the needle in the middle of the abscess. So just to answer quick about Propecia and all that stuff for your hair, that's it's a personal decision, right? That's what the doctors are supposed to say these days. But I think that stuff is a malignancy, and it can cause impotence. It's those sort of, and I've got a section on that in my frequently asked questions in Hormone Secrets. So you should read that for more detail. But I think that class of drugs is horrible, should never have been allowed on the market, and certainly not for this use. So the topicals are fine, the ones you use as cream. Okay, so what should you avoid? Well, you guys should read Butchered by Healthcare and see what you should avoid. I mean, for example, the corruption in medicine. Now, this is going to sound like wild stuff to you, but the most corrupt specialty is psychiatry. And the reason it's corrupt is none of their drugs have had proper placebo or sugar pill controlled trials, right? And the results we get now with modern psychiatry are far worse than the third world gets. And they don't have the medicines and all the expensive treatments. I mean, the psychiatrists are frauds from start to finish. There are studies on talking therapy, which shows that on average it's no better than a priest, right? And so the medications are tremendously addictive. They cause, SSRI antidepressants cause violence and suicide. I mean, probably our school shooters have all, but this is suppressed by the media, which is pharma controlled. 75% of the media money comes directly from pharma, and virtually all of the news media, the news shows are sponsored 100% by pharma. I mean, it's just crazy. So these school shooters and the mass murderers are, and what's cause and effect? Obviously, these people have a screw loose, and they were put on antidepressants and all that stuff. But the close observers of this think it's causal, and they think that, and these psych medicines lend to chronicity. And what happens is you get on these things, you're addicted to them, you're stuck in this spiral, and it's just a freaking mess. We have another class of drugs called atypical antipsychotics. Zyprexa was the first. Those drugs shorten your life by 10 to 20 years. There's no controversy about that. And psychiatrists hand them out like jelly beans. They use them for depression and all these other things that are, and the definitions of all this stuff are dictated by pharmaceutical company controlled physicians. In other words, they're people with financial conflicts that put together the standards, and then the doctors now work all for the HMOs and the large organizations, and they are forced to prescribe a certain number of statins and antidepressants and all this other stuff to make the statistics that they're supposed to have. So, the whole thing is like a top-down control by these sociopathic and malignant and criminal organizations that we call pharmaceutical companies. And I don't say that lightly.
No, for sure, which is why we're trying to offer alternatives. We talk a lot about, ways that you can take control of your own health and try and sidestep some of this stuff. And some of the stuff is very simple, like we said, getting enough sleep, being outside, cold. We even talk a bit about plant medicines and things like that, because really the way to take your power back is to have your own sovereignty and to do your own research as much as you can. And
the overarching
and work out what's right.
answer to Russ's question is we must all be totally suspicious of traditional medicine. And 50% of it works. We got orthopedic problems. We got a broken hip. Those things are necessary. But the medications are largely fraudulent and damaging. And so read Butchered by Healthcare to really get it.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to cut you off there either.
Sorry.
Yoho, but and something there too of just like, look, my life was saved. I went through Stanford 5, I went through, 12 weeks of chemotherapy. I had radiation treatment. I was covered in radiation treatment. And I was 21 years old and I'm 50 years old now. So I've had a great life being cured from that. And I've had a different relationship with it. A lot of it for me was, I know it saved my life. So I have a tendency to sort of overtrust doctors too, because I'm like, well, you sort of told me what to do and I didn't die. So, but I think there's a part of that too, where I think there are areas to be very suspicious. And also how we treat cancer is still a questionable thing as well. Like, we've had Deanna DeVille on, who was diagnosed with terminal breast cancer, and she's still doing great and getting, doing ayahuasca and Cambo and teaching us all about her life. And I just think It's hard because there are times where we have to trust these doctors, and there are times where maybe we have to have our own sovereignty and think for ourselves a little bit too, especially as we're getting older and feeling not as great. But it doesn't mean we're dying. It just means we need to take better care of ourselves and change things.
So you've had a great experience. 50% of medicine works and should be respected, but the key problem is figuring out what's the 50%. And if you allow me to expand a little bit about this, I'm going to run down oncologists. Okay, so in the case of oncology, less than 10% of what they do works. And this is in their own literature. Their goal is supposedly to increase lifespan by 2 months with the new chemotherapy agents. 2 months. Now, I'm not saying that some of their stuff doesn't work. They have lymphomas, testicular cancer, a few other diseases they can cure. So those things are fabulous successes. But the oncologists have this enormous conflict of interest in America. So listen to this carefully. They get 20% of the cost of the drug in their pocket for administering it in the office. Now that's a relationship. That's called a kickback. If it was between two doctors, it's called capping. It's a felony. It's a federal felony, right? But the pharmaceutical companies have been given a pass. And so these guys are all whores for the latest and the greatest and the most expensive. And the cost of these drugs, it used to be $100,000 a year. Now some of them are in the millions. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. These companies are shameless, and they're really interested in the revenues and nothing else. So oncology is the second most corrupt medical sector after psychiatry.
Yeah. It is frightening. And like, again, it just reiterates, the purpose of why we're trying to do this podcast and give people some alternatives, because unfortunately, the schooling is also mainly controlled a lot by these same organisations. And so even if you've got training, I've taken a science degree, but obviously that's also funded by the same organisation. So trying to step out and do
medical
something
schools
different.
Are all funded by pharma. I mean, to a huge degree.
Well, all schools, not just medical schools, even if you're doing an experiment, I do red light therapy, and it's something that's difficult to get the research funding for because, obviously it's a competitor to the pharmaceutical industry in one way, especially if they're looking at red light therapy for things like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. So perhaps there's an issue there why these things don't get as much funding as maybe they should.
Well, you probably are aware that Fauci's groups, plus Bill Gates, plus the Wellcome Trust in Britain, which is equally malignant, have funded 70% roughly of scientific, medical, biological, scientific research around the world. And if you are not on board with these agendas of the big bucks and ignoring bad results, and if you're not on board with that stuff, if you step out of line, you'll never get a dime ever again, and your career is over. They badmouth you and out you in various places. So, I'd like to say that you're better shape over there in Britain, but the Wellcome Trust is a mess. And the head of that thing is a sociopath.
Yes. There are a lot of challenges. But what would you say if you had to leave us with something that people can actually take forward? Because I think we want to especially here talk to people who are maybe coming up to a time when, in your view, they need to take the hormones. What would be kind of the thing you leave us with? We used to do a 7-day challenge, something where we could actually take on board ourselves. But I think we already know what that is. I think Russ and I have both got to read these books.
That's right. The 7-day challenge is to read both books. But
yes.
The message that I have to everyone is you need to do your own homework. And the mainstream media it's an absolute coin flip about whether anything they tell you is true or false. I mean, everything from, these are a perfect example. I mean, you're always going to get the line that whatever the proprietary drug du jour is great. But this is inexpensive to treatment. It should be inexpensive. I mean, you end up going to some specialized doctor who charges you a lot of money. But and the growth hormone, that's one of the hormones that we have the most. We have the many, many years experience with all these things. We know all about endocrinology, and these things are still being run down despite all this clinical experience. And growth hormone has been made so outrageously expensive that you can't even get a hold of it. I mean, it's thousands of dollars a month. And it probably is the safest and the best hormone of all. I mean, it has many effects that are good. So the answer is do your research. These books are cheap. They're not a profit enterprise, and I recommend you start here. I spent a year on Hormone Secrets and 3 years on Butchered by Healthcare. So
yeah, well, I'm definitely going to be reading the Hormone Secrets because I'm someone who I actually try and avoid taking anything at all. But from what you're saying, you know, maybe I need to kind of look a bit more into that and see how I can maybe maximize and use these other substances. So I'm definitely going to be looking at that. So thank you. It was very cool and some great information. We really appreciate it because I think a lot of people don't know. Well, for a start, people don't know why they would need these hormones, where to get them, and also why, you know, there is perhaps these challenges in the healthcare system that they're not getting that advice.
Well, I'm grateful for your platform, and you guys are great hosts and good interviewers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well,
thank you very
much. So
much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Breaking the gray.